I'm Gabby, our new network and engagement manager. Happy to be here.
Catalina.
Hi everyone, my name is Catalina. I'm Undaunted summer intern, so very excited to be here.
Anyone else who's new?
All right, I will drop the agenda notes one more time in the chat, which has links. If you haven't added your organization and name, please take a second just to click in for that. And Sarah, do you want to try to help us? So the conversation has two parts today. Maybe I could just say that if you look at the agenda, the first part, Sarah has tried to pull together some slides, just trying to understand sort of what are the implications of the bill that passed and was signed last week. And then the second part of the agenda, we are hoping that folks will, start to just share out a little bit about how we are making sense of that, how folks are moving, what resources people are creating, what support folks need in the network to work with different stakeholders across the country. So we're going to start with Sarah with an update.
You all seeing slides? Yeah. All right. Cool. As usual, these are fresh off the press, and I'm sharing them with you all as, kind of a first audience. So bear with me, and I have some big red draft on some feature slides because we've been working through this, as you can imagine, in the hours since the bill passed. And so, this is still work that we're doing to understand where we are in the world. So quick refresher, right? We all know, if you've been coming to these calls, we've had tax credits, unlimited, uncapped tax credits for these 5 technologies as created by the IRA, specifically ground source heat pumps, with a little asterisk there. Lots of folks have been getting checks, in connected with this policy. You can go to our webpage that we have down at the bottom here, where we've been enumerating some of the folks that have gotten checks. So here are some highlights, smiling faces with big checks, and other blog posts that we have for schools that have actually made it all the way through the process. So that continues. Checks are still flowing despite everything we're going to say today. Checks are still flowing from the IRS. So important to mention that. Okay, so here's, just as a reminder, here's where we were in terms of, we had 4 different tax credits governing 5 different technologies. This will be kind of important for tracking what's happening with the policy because they affect these different tax credits differently. And originally, right, with the IRA, we had these sunsets that were nice and far into the future. And so one of the big selling points for our schools was that we had a time horizon over which to build a strategy to take advantage of these tax credits. And with this bill, we'll kind of track through to some of the changes that the bill introduces. Okay, so the first and the good news is that the tax credit for ground source heat pumps is completely untouched by the bill. And this is you're gonna get confused about this, and many folks are confused about this in moments going forward. And so, just want to clarify, when people talk about geothermal, sometimes they talk about geothermal energy production, and that's in a different tax credit, and that does have new rules. And some people talk about geothermal for homes, and that's a different tax credit, and that does have different rules. But in this space, we're talking about geothermal for schools, for commercial buildings, for heating and cooling, not for energy production. And that tax credit, Section 48, is untouched by the bill. So all the things we've been talking about that we know and love, the 5 times multiplier for prevailing wage and apprenticeship, the 10% bonus credit for domestic content energy communities, the domestic content requirement for projects over 1 megawatt, all that stays the same, as does the phase out date of you must commence construction by January 1st, 2035. Miraculous. Good news. More to come on that. The situation is not the same for electric vehicles. And, we'll talk with Catherine, Carolina, and hear from others of you around this most urgent phase out, which is now September 30th of this year instead of 2032. Huge bummer. And similarly, it's now changed for the EV charging equipment that we need for those electric vehicles. Maybe there was actually some logic and they thought, oh, let's give people a little bit longer because they may have already bought those electric vehicles. Let's give them a chance to charge them up. So we have until June of next year to commence construction on EV charging equipment. And then the conversation gets more complicated, but I'll just start with the phase outs. Thermal energy storage, the phase out is also untouched. It stays 12, 31, 33. I have an asterisk, which I still need to put a note for. Apologies. And we have a really different story around solar, where we have to be placed into service by the end of 2027. And I'm highlighting that placed into service because it's a different milestone, right, than commence construction. And that is important to notice. So, so those are like the changes and the phase outs. The more complicated part of what's changed are the new rules related to for solar and thermal storage, because remember, those two are in section 48 capital E. So if you're looking at the sections here of the different tax credits, there are new rules for that tax credit, 48 capital E. And some of you may have been hearing some of these rules, FEOC. Let me actually, before I get into FEOC, let me just stop there and see if there are questions around what I've said so far in terms of the bill, the timelines, the credits that we're talking about here. Are we all tracking, and what questions have I already kind of introduced in people's minds? Anything? This all review?
Sarah, I think the 30C is placed in service, not commence construction.
Okay, great.
So unfortunately, you have to actually have it installed by 6/30/26.
I see Catherine nodding too. Okay. Do one of my coworkers want to go in and just make that change right in the slide right now? Placed in service for 30C. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Are we tracking what we're talking about here? Yeah. Okay. Gosh, now where did my presentation go? You all still seeing the slides? Now I'm missing you.
We can see the slides.
Okay, great. Okay, now I can't see you, so just bear with me and shout out if you want to chat about something. Okay, so now, right, for section 48, capital E, solar and energy storage, we have a new set of restrictions called foreign entity of concern, which are going to impact these projects and, you know, creates a whole need for technical assistance. I'm sure you all have been getting some of the emails that I have been from, like, you know, Climate Reality Project and, you know, other groups saying, commence construction, go, go, go. We got to go, people, we got to go. We got to get started. Yes, and we need to help guide school districts in how to get started and understand the risks still now of getting started and how they're going to navigate, you know, the, you know, kind of years to come with these foreign entity restrictions, because there are implications immediately for projects. You know, some of them layer in through time, but there are immediate implications that we need to be honest about and we need to educate folks about. So there are foreign entities of concern, right? This whole concern is around North Korea, China, Iran, and oh my gosh, help me, Jacob, last one. There's a fourth that I'm just spacing on right now.
Russia.
Russia, right? Thank you. It's all about money flowing to those countries, the nationals, you know, citizens of those countries, companies that have majority ownership by humans from those countries. This is the whole kind of, this is the geopolitical landscape kind of getting shoved into these tax credits and into the work that schools are trying to do. So that's the headline is about, this is about 4 countries in the world. And so the new bill creates 4 different tests to make sure that people and money is not flowing to those 4 countries. And we're calling them as a community the entity level test, which really seeks to eliminate any credits actually paid to those countries or to entities influenced by those countries, which, believe it or not, schools are crazily enough wrapped up in. There's a ministerial restrictions test, which is all about where we're getting our panels from, our inverters, our bits and pieces, right? Where our components are being supplied from. And then there's what we're calling the payments test and recapture. And that's about what contracts you've signed related to this clean energy project that could be construed as giving that counterparty, a Chinese company, control over your project. And there it's the language is test and recapture, because they can actually come back and take the credit back for 10 years later. And so we'll talk more about that. Let me stop again. Questions on, have people heard FEOC? Are these questions about these ideas at a high level? And again, I can't see you, so just come off mute and say something.
Hey, Sarah, Mary had a question, I think, in the chat. Maybe Mary, it was about projects from 2024 that are requesting credits, or will this apply to projects that are in the process of requesting their credits?
Great question. So no, and the reason it's kind of a technical one is because Section 48E, which is where all these new rules are attached to Section 48 capital E, that credit only started for projects that commence construction January 1st, 2025. So solar projects that commence construction 2024 are fine. And they actually get a different credit altogether, Section 48. So they are fine. Other questions?
Sarah, do you think it might be helpful to mention how in the bill text they use the language prohibited foreign entities? I think I've heard recently that maybe that is more direct language to the bill than FEOC. Just curious if you have any thoughts there that you think is helpful to share.
FEOC is the kind of the language that, and the acronym that you will hear in the pronunciation of the acronym. So yeah, I think that's fine just to keep going with that for now. But okay, so we have these 3 different flavors of concerns that we need to help schools navigate. And so I'm going to go into each one of them, and I have big draft here because again, these are, kind of fresh and I have not had other eyes on them yet. Jacob and others are seeing these for the first time and will appreciate comments and people scrutinizing them. So the first is this entity test, right? Who are you, right? We're trying to eliminate any of our tax dollars going to these foreign entities, specified foreign entities. And in the case of schools, where they get tripped up is we also don't want these credits going to foreign influenced entities. And part of how they define a foreign influenced entity is if more than 15% of your outstanding debt was originally issued to lenders from these 4 countries that we care about. Now this is kind of a you might think, oh, well, who's selling their debt to Russia or North Korea or Iran? But the point is the way the municipal debt market works, it is both onerous and potentially impossible to know who you issue your debt to in this market that is very opaque and very, diversified. I don't know if we have some of our municipal bond friends on, but this is kind of consistently the story that we've heard, is that it is either impossible or completely onerous. Like one school district that we were talking about yesterday with 30 schools, so not a huge district, had 18 different bond issuances on which they would have debt outstanding during the next year. And the thought of going back and figuring out who they issued each of those 18 bond issuances to was more than they were going to be able to stomach, and may actually be impossible. So as crazy as it sounds, this rule has the potential to render schools as foreign influenced entities and make it unable for them to capture credits that are not placed into service in this current taxable year. I've got text references below here to kind of the actual language that you can see for yourself. And there's, you know, this key issue, like one of the issues we were talking about yesterday is this for, you know, all that issue, like outstanding during the taxable year or, you know, issued and current outstanding or issued within the current year. So there's some things we're still trying to work out, but this is the big idea is, geez, schools can't prove that they're not foreign influence entities potentially, and they won't be able to take this credit beyond this current fiscal year. Let me stop there again.
So
Ask
is your
a question.
sense,
Oh,
sorry,
I'll wait.
okay. So have you already heard that entities like schools might be scared of this and they're scared of a gotcha, and so they're not going to enter into this because it's just too risky?
Yeah. The call that I was on yesterday with an implementer said, yeah, he took this to like the notion, this example I just said of like they have 30 schools, they had 18, you know, bond issuance outstanding. They said, yeah, no way, we're done. We're just not doing this. So yes, it is already scaring folks away. There is work that's going on with the National Association of Bond Lawyers and, you know, with GFOA to try and see whether there is some workaround around this. So I think this is a known issue that's on some people's plates, and we are, you know, trying to see if there's any way through this. We brought this issue up when it was still in text form with Senate Finance Committee, and they seemed open to fixing it, but it did not get fixed in the final law that was passed.
Lisa,
There's another question.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess two thoughts. One, and it's so good to hear about the potential workaround. Can you say a little bit more about how that might work? I guess in guidance or whatever. But number two, it just seems like this issue would be really, really ripe for campaign work too, because it's so, you know,
Absurd.
taking a blanket away from a baby or something, because it's like ridiculous on its face. But back to the first question, any
I don't know that there is a workaround. I don't know what that will look like. That's way over my pay grade. I will try and stay close to the smarter people that are figuring that out, but I don't know that there is a workaround.
Okay.
So we will see. Jonathan, were you popping in here?
no, I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to move to the next one. I think it'll be helpful to apply an example. So there's also this material assistance test. You know, you're going to see some similar bits and pieces that you could look for here. Again, this is about where we're getting components from. You can see when it takes effect. Again, this is just 48E projects. So schools are going to have to work with their solar installers to try and source that material. There are percentages, you know, based on what technology. So in the bottom there, you're seeing kind of the percentages for a solar project. That'll, you know, increase over time. So this looks somewhat like the original domestic content. It's a little bit, it has a different form to it. So it's not a carbon copy, but it's, you know, spiritually related. And then the next one, which is, you know, the newest, new and also gnarly, is this payments test and recapture, right? And this is about the project. So it's not the entity, but it's the project, and it's who has what they call effective control over the project. And do any of these specified foreign entities have effective control? The way they might have effective control is if the school district signs a contract and makes a payment on a contract to that foreign company. So think a Chinese company. So as an example, you know, let's say a school purchases a battery from Schneider Electric. I think Schneider is a German company. They may be publicly traded. Schneider will have to prove that they are not a specified foreign entity. And there are rules for publicly traded companies. And so that one payment to Schneider, if they were a foreign company would render this project now ineligible for credits, and it will do that for 10 years out. So for 10 years, the IRS is going to have the ability to look back and say, did you in the previous year make a payment related to this project to a specified foreign entity? If you have, then we are going to get to recapture 100% of the credit. So schools are basically going to have to analyze any existing or new contracts relevant to the project. Licensing agreements are kind of rife, ripe for this concern. And we're thinking about kind of contract language that will need to go into any contract terms requiring that counterparty to attest the fact that they are not a specified foreign entity and prove that. And this is for all 48E capital E projects with a little bit of an asterisk. The way there's some technical issues around the drafting. It says it starts 2 years later, but then I think because of the look back, there's this issue that it's really, so conservatively, folks are saying all 48E capital E projects, so solar and storage, should be worried about this, which is to say any solar projects that commence construction on or after January 1st, 2025. I'm mindful of time and I want to finish by 1:30. So I'm going to put these into an example for you all, and I hope that will be helpful. So here we have a solar project that was started on April 5th of 2025, and they plan on placing it into service August of this year, August 31st. Because it's being placed into service before the end of 2027, it's eligible for a full credit. So that's like, the first part of this. We said we have till December 31st, 2027. Then we say, okay, well, because it's being placed into service during the fiscal year within which this bill signing happened, and here schools are actually in a good spot, right? If your fiscal year is a calendar year, you have less time for this to be true. But because, this school's fiscal year ends June 30th next year, anything they put into service in this same fiscal year does not need to meet that entity level test. So that issue we said about, 15% of their outstanding municipal debt, don't have to worry about that. It doesn't come into play if you place into service during this fiscal year in which the bill was signed. Jacob, you're going to squawk if you think I get any of this wrong. How am I doing so far?
No squawking yet.
Okay. Next, 48 capital E projects that commence construction before January 1st, 2026 do not need to meet the material restrictions test. And voila, we've done that, right? We've started construction on April 5th, 2025. So we don't need to meet the material restrictions test because we started before January 1st. But because this start date renders this a 48 capital E project. It's not, last year when we were still in section 48, all solar projects that commence construction after January 1st, 2025 are taking advantage of 48 capital E. This school district will be subject to 100% recapture for 10 years based on this payments test. And so any contract they sign related to the solar facility for the next 10 years, they should make sure it's not with a specified foreign entity and have language in any contracts where that counterparty attests that they're not a specified foreign entity.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that last part is the contract should also state that they're on the hook for any recapture. So that all future contracts.
Let's do that.
I don't know that anybody would sign it, but
Yeah. So this is some of the to be developed work. Okay, let me stop there, and then I've got a quick energy community update that I want to do in 1 minute. This was probably a lot for folks to process. I hope these slides are helpful. They are in draft form, so just take them with a grain of salt right now. Show them to other people and say, "Is this right? How did we I'm happy to have other eyes. I would really appreciate other eyes on this, beating up and making sure it comports with what people think are the right interpretations of the law. I will be putting this in front of other folks. Again, I just finished these slides before this call, so that's I'm showing you my work in progress here, but hope it's helpful. quick clarifying questions and I will let you guys kind of turn over this some more.
Sarah, Ethel has a question in the chat. It says, if projects begin, just to be clear, if projects begin before the end of fiscal year 26, they are okay? Question mark.
Well, it depends on which rule you're talking about. Okay, right? Because material restrictions, right? You have to commence construction before January 1st, 2026. And anything that commenced this year is not okay in that it's subject to this payments test, right? Okay. I'm going to do a quick happy thing on energy communities and then turn over for us to keep moving on where we go from here. Energy communities, remember, we still have this bonus that's in play. It's in play for solar projects for now, and it's in play to the extent we can do them. And it's will be in play for many years to come for geothermal. So I want to just highlight that we just got earlier in June, the IRS issued a new notice that identified the next annual tranche of energy communities based on employment data. And so here I'm just showing you as an example what that did for Massachusetts. On the left, you're seeing a map of the energy communities for the previous June to June, and on the right, in the colored areas, and particularly the teal areas are the good areas where this bonus comes into play. On the right, you're seeing the map for Massachusetts now, and it's a whole lot more areas. This just has to do with employment data, fossil fuel and unemployment data. So, different states are going to look differently. It's not all going to look as rosy as this. They could be losing areas. It's just to say big moves are afoot, and I'm relying on the Baker Tilly tool right now because the DOE tool is not updated. It still, as of this morning, looks like this. So warning, Department of Energy map, not up to date, but you can go and see their notice and the appendices that enumerate all these census tracts that are now energy communities, and these are hyperlinks here. Quick questions on that? Okay. Stop. Turn it back to you, Jonathan.
Thanks. And hey, Sarah, thank you so much for the quick work on all of this. What a service you are providing to our whole network and community. And just on behalf of Undaunted and everyone on the call for years now, thank you for continuing with expertise and just humility. Hey, here's my best thinking, y'all. Just really appreciate your leadership and work. There are a couple other Undaunted resources, and Sarah, you have in the agenda before we kind of jump. There's another piece of kind of a new executive order. Did you want to say anything about items 2B and C quickly there?
Sure. Yeah. I'm sure some of you have seen it. Part of the way the bill got passed was President Trump promised the hardliners that he would find another way to stick it to clean energy. And that was what the executive order from a few days is all about. And it's about, they instructed Treasury to look at the commence construction rule, the rule that says, okay, you've hit that milestone, you're eligible for a credit, to look at that rule and make modifications to it. Right now you have to spend, there are a few tests, and they might mess with those tests. So, it's still just an executive order. We don't know what Treasury will do. There was also, he also directed was Interior to look at permitting. That shouldn't impact our schools. I don't believe. Others can correct me, but the one that I'm keeping a close eye on for schools is the commence construction piece. So to be determined, not good. Yeah. That's the end of my unhappy news.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So, so we've kind of reserved the rest of the time together today to hear from the network in terms of how folks are thinking about moving in this moment, what supports folks need, there are different timeframes for the different, credits. So like as Sarah said, for ground source heat pumps, we have some, runway, we can think a little more long-term about those. And then for, some credits, I think the electric vehicles credit is September 30th, 2025. Right. So we thought we would, start with Carolina and, Catherine, if you all we'd start with the electric vehicles, if you all would be willing to sort of share a little bit about how you're thinking about moving in this moment, what resources you have, what support you need, how can we help move and support the electric vehicles work, and then we'll kind of just open it up for others that want to share. So Carolina or Catherine, want to go for it? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, thank you for these explanations, because it is incredibly helpful to know how school districts are being impacted, what is happening, and would not have been able to keep up if it weren't for this group, and especially Sarah's updates. And Catherine, feel free to chime in anything I forget, but obviously we're looking at fewer than 90 days for school districts to be able to claim this tax credit. Of particular concern is that school districts that applied for and received an EPA Clean School Bus Program Award, they were heavily encouraged by EPA, by everyone, by us as well, to factor in these tax credits into the savings. And EPA, as a matter of fact, lowered the incentive amount for the Clean School Bus Program after round one, saying, hey, you're going to get this tax credit. And so we are going to employ a suite of activities to try to get school districts aware of this new deadline. If they weren't tracking what's in the bill, which is very likely, they might just not know. And we have the first thing that we're doing is a webinar that WRI is leading on. We're also working on getting some additional co-sponsors, and I'll put that link in the chat. That's going to be 2 weeks from now, July 24th, 2 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to go through the tax credit and what it is, what's changed, who can apply, all the regular stuff, and then also have a school superintendent who actually filed for the tax credit himself walk through that process and demonstrate, step by step, this is how you do it. He was successful in getting that tax credit for his school district. And so it is a success story that we can share. We do have a promotional toolkit that I'll also drop in the chat if anyone could help us as far and wide as we can share this with your networks. We have sample email, sample newsletter blurb, sample social media for you to share this webinar. And again, it's coming up quickly, really. It's in about a week and a half. We're also working on updating materials like fact sheets and web pages that reflect, a new sense of urgency. And we're trying to identify which school districts really would need to be thinking about. There were some discrepancies in the budget bill. What was passed talked about acquired by, but the previous definition had been placed in service, and that seems to be safest because the pre-filing registration requires documentation that you would only have realistically if you have accepted delivery of the vehicle. And so anyone that's in fiscal years 24 and 25, depending on what that fiscal year looks like, we believe can file for this. In some cases, those filing deadlines have passed. So in the webinar, we'll go through with greater detail, like who really needs to be filing now. Of course, no one is going to get a bus delivered in 3 months if they haven't already likely signed a purchase agreement. So our understanding is that they most likely needed to have already bought this bus or at least started those conversations so that they can get the bus, place it into service by September 30th. So I'll pause there, Catherine. I know WRI is also doing a ton of work on this, so I'll move it over to you.
Yeah, that was a really great summary. The only things I would add, I think 45W is our collective first priority, just given the deadline being September 30th in this case. Carolina and I talked about how after that, we'll do a webinar on 30C, since that deadline is next summer. It's June 30th, 2026. So there's a little bit more time there. The other couple of quick things, not on the tax credit front, but the law eliminated all of the unobligated clean heavy duty vehicle program funds, which were in many cases used for electric school buses, and likewise eliminated the unobligated DERA, Diesel Emissions Reduction Act funding that had been plussed up plussed up through the IRA. So those funding pots are reduced as well. But the big thing on everybody's mind is the tax credits, and it is the more complex thing. And we're just basically trying to figure out how we can support as many school districts as possible to claim the credit. The tricky thing is this new standard that they inserted in the law of acquired. So, there's no definition yet of what do they mean by acquire a bus. There was a colloquy on the House floor that attempted to define it, but it's, as Carolina was saying, a little bit of a risk to encourage school districts to take a lot of action based off of that, because at the end of the day, it will be a matter of how Treasury chooses to implement or interpret the word acquired. And so the previous standard of placed in service seems to be kind of the best way for us to proceed at this point. Yeah, any questions on that? One thing I'll say in terms of kind of, in addition to the webinar and updating our materials and fielding kind of a lot of one-off questions from school districts, there's no one kind of answer or best piece of advice in a situation like this, but we are encouraging them to do outreach and rekindle their relationships with state energy offices or state environmental offices, local green banks if they have them, or state green banks, just kind of elevating this as an issue to the extent that there could be a solution from one of those entities for their particular case, or just to make sure this is on the radar of those agencies and offices in the event that they want to try to think of some sort of systemic resolution. Likewise, it's a long shot, but we're encouraging them to reach out to their dealer, reach out to their manufacturer and say, hey, when we negotiated this deal previously, we were all expecting $40,000 for this bus. It might be Pollyanna-ish, but would you consider renegotiating our contract, or would you split the difference with us, right? If we're going to be for a school district is going to be on the hook for $40,000 and the OEM doesn't contribute to that, that just doesn't feel right. So those are the sorts of things that we're offering when school districts come to us with questions.
Catherine, I have a question. I'm curious where school districts are with still even trying to get access to money they are awarded, and how does that current state of where their money is intersect with the now the cliff of the deadline of this new tax credit? Are schools even still struggling to get access to money, or has that by and large been cleared up for 2024 awardees? And I'm curious kind of where that federal money sits now.
Yeah, with the Clean School Bus Program, you mean the
Yes.
rebate and grant funds? Yes. As far as we know, those challenges have been cleared up. It was this lengthy process of months trying to kind of make sure that EPA was beginning to be communicative again and get those funds made accessible through the various payment portals. But we have not heard of any challenges with that lately, so that's positive. In theory, there's a fourth round of funding that EPA could announce at some point, but that's a big question mark. I will say I kind of buried the lead here, but because it's not an IRA program, the Clean School Bus Program's unobligated funds were actually not implicated in HR 1. And so there's still $2 billion in Clean School Bus Program funds that EPA could choose to award in grant rounds this year and next year. Sarah, did you have a question?
Do we think
Carolina, please jump in too if you
do
have
we think there's
responses.
any chance Elise Elden EPA would issue new grants for electric school buses in this world? I mean, that just seems, I hear you, but I just can't imagine any staff at agency right now going, yeah, we're gonna do that. I don't know.
Well, there's
That's the next
Carolina,
fight.
what's that?
I said that's the next fight after
Yeah.
this. They would need to, by our math, release that funding by September 30th. So it's coming up quickly. We've seen some hopeful signs. There was, in their appropriations request they made to Congress, mention of how they needed additional funding to make reviews of Clean School Bus Program awards, because they anticipated another $1 billion in rebates being awarded and they wanted to do additional checks. So that's a nice sign. Or maybe they just want to, harass school districts that have already been awarded. The OIG, the EPA's Inspector General, is also going to release a summary of their audit reports that they've done because they have gone after this program pretty heavily. That's expected by the end of the year, which I'm hoping means fiscal year. So EPA could also use that as a delay tactic and say, we're not going to release this funding. But the issue is they have $900 million in applications that are just sitting there. So they've told press that they will issue guidance to those applicants and have an update for them at some point. Industry, I think, has, and WI knows more about this, they feel a little bit more bullish that an announcement is coming by the end of this year. Of course, they could reconfigure the entire award system and say, we're just going to give all of this to propane. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that last point is why there is a little bit of a chance. It's in theory, they could split the pot almost half towards propane. They're not supposed to, but it's alternative fuels. And so
Got it.
there
Got
are
it.
some other stakeholders that are excited about it besides us. And there's a little bit of Republican support in the Senate for the Clean School Bus Program. And they, like Senator Capito in particular, leaned a lot on Lee Zeldin and his team, from what I understand, to get the funds flowing again in general. And I think would like to see future rounds. So I hear you. It seems like a long shot, but I think there are also some elements to it that might make it happen. And the funds still exist. They weren't deobligated. So that's a positive.
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Lisa.
Lisa.
Thank you so much for that. Given all the hardship we're collectively experiencing, I really, really hope we could up the ante on that. So just any more besides Capito, is there anyone else? And then Carolina, like, is the coalition ramping up any visibility or pressure? Because there's just this like, I could see like press conferences on the Hill with kids with inhalers, things that we've done before. But it's just a deep embarrassment. It's just a moment to underscore the shamefulness kind of and put some pressure on. And if the pressure doesn't serve us in securing the outcome we hope for, hopefully it serves us in the public eye as we move toward, I mean, I know we're shift 3, but as we move toward the next opportunity in our society to shift the balance of power a little bit. So anyway, what's the advocacy thinking about vis-a-vis pushing the envelope from people who do this every day?
I think there's concern that if it's coming from a bunch of environmental groups, it will give them more ammunition to say, no, we will not release this funding. So from the Alliance perspective right now, what we've discussed is needing to find school districts who applied, and we need to also work with some of the contractors like First Student and Highland and others to see if they have data on this that they're willing to share, because there is no public list of who applied for the last round of funding, and work with school districts directly to make a plea. Understandably, school districts are handling a lot of things right now, and so they may not be very willing, and we saw this during the budget bill, that not a lot of them wanted to stick their necks out, essentially. I think if we pass a point of September 30th and there's no awards, then it's time to start making, some noise. But I am concerned that if, again, it comes from the Alliance for Electric School Buses, which includes a lot of environmental groups, I don't think that makes sense for the target audience of Lee Zeldin, unfortunately. So accountability, yes, to get them to the release of funding.
And our health groups painted the same way. I just like child health.
Yeah, I think we're going to try to work with them on this, but there's just a lot right now that's happening. But absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're not going to give up. We're not just going to assume that we're just going to sit on our hands and wait. But I think what we do publicly has to be very targeted at the specific audience of one. Which I'll just say, if anyone knows any school districts in very red and conservative states that you think would be willing to speak up about this and maybe applied or would like to apply for future EPA funding for clean school buses, we would love to talk to you and see what we can do to get them to, reach out to EPA and ask where's the awards that we applied for.
I mean, we could take this offline, Carolina and Catherine, but I wonder if there's some like data mining to do of the RSVPs from your past webinars, like over the last couple of years, to look at, you know, districts and just some outreach of, you know, asking people to raise their hand if they applied and haven't, you know, heard back yet, to try to build that list a little bit.
Yeah, when they originally announced the winners from the fourth round of funding, we were hoping they would list the winners and the wait list so that there would be like a named constituency that would be putting. They didn't. They were generous enough to give us the top line, so we know how much funding was applied for, and it gives us a sense. But yeah, I think that's right. Those are folks who have planned on that funding in theory.
Can't you
Yeah, we
FOIA
can
for
put that
them?
during the webinar. Good point, Carolina.
Can you FOIA that, Catherine?
Oh, we have been trying to FOIA some things lately, that we haven't received the results yet.
Yeah.
I mean, we know industry has a list because they worked with many school districts on applications. So I think we also need to start pressuring them to tell us. I mean, it's in their interest for the awards to be made as well. So lots of folks that helped with applications and applied on behalf of school districts, they know. So we gotta get them to work on this too.
Jonathan, should we transition to kind of resources that people are developing? Like
Yeah.
we appreciate that this is all kind of some new stuff. You know, we've been hearing some from our electric school bus friends around, you know, the webinar they've got going and toolkits and advocacy. But in terms of, so there's like a short term here, and, you know, in our minds, there's this, our next phase is really around helping schools through this transition. Communicating clearly what the new law says, trying to understand and hear from them what tools they need to navigate this moment and help. You know, I always talk about all these projects as being a team sport at a school, right? So what materials do they need that are reliable to help bring their stakeholders within their district along? And then we've got like the longer term conversation that, you know, we're excited to have in future around the continuing opportunity around ground source heat pumps. So curious, you know, what folks in this community are building in terms of resources to help school districts maybe first through this transition. So welcome either ideas that you have for resources that you would want to have available to you or that you are going to build yourself. What are people thinking? Tish, I know you probably got some stuff up your sleeve for solar. People are going to look to you. What are you doing for solar? Do you know yet?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that question. Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry to
Yeah.
put you on the spot. I know that many school districts are probably already emailing you guys, so.
You're on the cutting edge here, Sarah, putting together those slides. I kind of like created my own way simpler version for myself and to communicate with some other people. But I think especially your distillation of the FIAC part, that is the section I'm just like, I don't know, it's really complicated. So I appreciate you being able to go through and explain the timeline, like kind of all of the overlapping timelines and deadlines. Because I'm even just trying to communicate I wish there was a clearer way to say, oh, you have until the end of this year. But that's not even really, you know, true, because I was like, oh, at the end of this year, then fiat kicks in. So ideally, you know, so I'm even just trying to distill in my mind what's the clear message of how to move forward. So even almost like in the next 6 months, you can sort of access the tax credit as you had expected without having to deal with FIAC. So that's sort of like one message I'm noodling on. But it seems like that payments test was the piece. I was like, oh, that's
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
part
Yeah.
not through. So yeah, I'm not sure yet, yeah, how we're gonna communicate to schools about kind of how to move forward with this, because I think I guess that's one question I have for you and maybe Jacob is, you know, I remember, you know, there was a bit of a decision pause I sensed from schools when like the law came out and then there was no official guidance yet. And I think once the tax guidance got released, that it helped us to have a clear message. Here's the standard, right? So like in this time before the guidance, more official guidance comes out on some of these tests, on these definitions that we're all waiting to hear, how do we advise schools? Because even sort of how we're interpreting the law may not be how Department of Treasury defines things later. So what happens to these people caught in this time between now and official guidance coming out? If they're doing their best to interpret it now, and then the guidance that comes out later is different, what happens to those folks? Do they get screwed?
Jacob, do you want to pop in? And we had some of this conversation, yesterday around guidance in our chat. How would you take that question?
Well, the executive order actually spelled kind of it out in that they want less projects to qualify. And so the chaos itself, the longer they delay guidance, the less projects will be applied for. And so one of the methodologies is to delay the guidance, and less people will apply for the thing. So, as a general rule, you can act on law, as the law stands. So, but rarely do we find one of our clients that's willing to just act on the law without everything spelled out. So that's why you had that pause last time around, because everybody's natural instinct is, oh, we'll just wait a little while to find out what the details are. But you can actually act on the law and say, here's, at the end of the day, what happens? There's an IRS audit. You're not going to win an IRS audit, but you will potentially win in IRS appeals or in tax court after the fact. And nobody wants to go through any of that, but in those portions, you can say, here's the words on the page. These other words didn't exist yet. They came much later. We acted on the words on the page, and this is why we acted. And, more than likely you would win. You don't definitely win, but more than likely you win. And finding a client that's willing to take that position is very difficult. So at the end of the day, it goes back to giving the executive order exactly what they wanted, which is less people taking the incentive. So I think that's the unfortunate, sad facts.
What's the deadline for the guidance, or are there different guidance deadlines we should be looking out for?
Well, the executive order said send us guidance in 45 days, but in some areas, not in every area. But IRS misses those all the time. Yeah. One of the incentives we work on, 179D, the law said that they need to issue regulations. The law came out in 2005. We don't have regulations yet. We're at 2025. So 20 years.
And Jacob, correct me, but the executive order didn't have anything to do with FEOC, right? That was about commence construction. So we don't have any timeline, I don't believe, that they could even ignore around guidance related to FEOC and all this stuff that we're talking about, right? That's not what the executive order was about, I don't think.
Yeah, and the other thing that, DOGE is shrinking government and shrinking treasury, so they've actually removed people who would be doing this work. And so, like, even if you looked at the IRA as an example, we had the law come out in August of 2022. And then guidance came. It took about a year for all that guidance, and that's with the administration pushing for getting all this stuff out. I don't think that push is actually going to be there necessarily. Like, potentially if they can make FEOC as difficult as possible, maybe they are going to be pushing for that guidance, and we'll see it. But you saw how long it took on the IRA. It would take that same amount of time on this type of stuff.
I think we should be mindful of time here. We're in our last minute or so, and just to say a huge appreciation for folks being here today and for the conversation. Thank you, Carolina, Catherine, Tish, for sharing a little bit about what you're up to and what we can all do. I mean, it just seems very clear that schools are going to continue to be important sites for clean energy technologies. And so continuing to lift up examples of specific projects and how districts and schools are navigating this context together and how they are financing these kinds of projects. You know, this future that we are trying to get to is better for children and our communities. And so just appreciate this space and all the leadership out there as we try to help folks make the most of what remains of the federal incentives, but also as folks, you know, innovate and work on the next generation of how we build the capital stacks necessary to deploy these technologies. So thank you, everyone. And we will send out the slides. They're linked in the agenda, but as Sarah said, continue to kick the tires on everything. And if you have feedback for us, please be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.